The next couple of weeks, what I'm going to be doing is bringing this whole concept of strategy down into its very core focus from where we were, which was strategy as ideal types and the hierarchies and all that other stuff. And we're going to start talking about the other levels of strategy now, the other stages of the process, and really going in depth on them. And when I say in depth, I mean it's 3 weeks, and I hope in that time to complete the strategic part of this process so that you guys are able to really understand and say, okay, we understand how strategy works. We understand the different phases of the creative process. We understand how strategy brings us from stage to stage. We understand how to engage in strategic thinking. But more importantly, I want to know that you also understand what it means when you are engaging operatively or tactically. If you've done the online work that I've given you, then you should already have a clue about what I'm going to be talking about when I talk about the operative and when I talk about the tactical. With that, I'm going to try and give you guys a very broad sense of what those two phases are like and try and help you to understand what it means when I say this is theory and this is not how reality actually works in depth. Because once you get into an actual process, like the first time you go through this, it works great. But once you actually get into process and start running something, you're going to find that you're jumping back and forth. A meeting might be about one thing, and then another meeting might be a tactical meeting where you're actually talking about maneuvers. And then another meeting will be about resources and doctrine or something like that. And you're going to find that once you're actually in process of doing something, you've already created it once, and now you're trying to refine it and engage it more and create something even better than what you started out with, the process sort of falls apart a little bit and it becomes much more like muddy. You muddy the waters and you find that sometimes you're here and sometimes you're there. And you're jumping back and forth all the time. And it's not defined by the stages. You don't sit there and go, let's have a strategic meeting when you are doing this. You actually sit there and go, well, let's have a meeting about this new idea. And then you try and figure out how that new idea fits into your ideal types. And you figure out if it's even possible operatively, et cetera, et cetera. So like, while the theory looks pretty, it's important to remember that it's theory. And that what we do is we take this theory and when we put it out into the real world and we use it, we're going to find that the theory is relevant, but it is not absolute. And I really want to make sure that that is super duper clear to you, that the theory is very relevant, but it is not an absolute. It's not that you're always going to know exactly what stage you're in, or you're always going to know, like, it's going to be so pretty. You're always going to be strategic, and then you're going to be operative, and then you're going to be tactical. There are things which that happens for. Like I said, if you're planning a birthday party, unless something major happens as while you're going through the process, you're very likely to get through it and be done and fine. But if you are part of a company, I mean, Jaegers can attest to this. We had someone on Tuesday come in and talk. She basically said, once you've gone through this process once, you're now in muddy waters where one meeting might be about this and another meeting might be about that. And one of them's tactical and another one's very much strategic and another one's operative. And they're all happening at the same time. Why? Because everybody's trying to do their part and each person has to focus on the things that are relevant to them. So the people who are engaging tactically will engage tactically. The people who are engaging operatively will have to engage operatively. The people who have to think and engage strategically are going to be doing that. But you could be meeting with any one of those people on any given day, or all of those people on any given day. So while it's nice to think about this when you want to think about something you want to do on your own or in a group where you are the person guiding that process and you say, hey, we haven't done anything yet, we're really starting something, then it works. This theory is excellent and it works really, really well. Once that process is done once and now you are in the muck of it and you're trying to keep the thing running and alive and whatever and adapt it the way you want, you are going to have to rethink what's going on. But I hope that made sense, Chloe, that like as we move through this, like if you are planning something like a birthday party or your projects, for instance, your projects should go relatively smoothly because at least for the first time, once you've gotten into that, like that trial period and that prototyping one where you do that first run, it's going to run smoothly through that process. But once you've gotten through that and now you're trying to do 2 or 3 other ones at the same time, all of a sudden you'll find yourself bouncing between meetings about, objectives and resources and timing and things like that. And then you'll have another meeting soon thereafter about, well, who's doing what and who's in charge of this maneuver and who's in charge of that maneuver. And you're doing both of those at the same time because literally you're trying to do 2 or 3 different projects all at the, like 2 or 3 different parts to the project all at the same time. You're trying to hit different objectives all at the same time. And you're trying to create that vision. So moving forward, what I'm going to try and talk about is the objective stage and understand that in depth. So just to quickly look at it, like I said before, when we look at this, right, this pattern that we've found and we've talked about, it is theoretic, but there is a reality to it. When you are going through it the first time and you're trying to create something in the world, you are going to feel like you're moving through this system, moving through it, and eventually getting to the point where you're moving between that techno-tactical and tactical stage where, hey, I'm engaging specific skills in order to really relate to this specific thing, and then moving back to the tactical to maneuver to something else, etc. And even if you're in a group, you'll find yourselves doing this. Once you've done that, though, you're going to be bouncing back and forth, and you'll find yourself moving all around. And what happens is we're going to engage all these different elements right along the way, and each of these elements is going to help us differently in different stages. If I said before that at the strategic stage, the focus was going to be on things like intelligence and analysis and vision, then when we get to the operative stage, we're going to find that this focus is about to change on us, and that the focus is very much going to be about organizing around specific objectives and specific things that we kind of feel like if we don't get these things done, we can't say we succeeded in any real way. So this balance is going to become very important. So when we talk about the operative stage thinking, this is the phase of creative constraints. This is the phase where we say, wait a second, we no longer have this option of like, well, what do we want to do? Let's think big picture. Let's do a whole bunch of if-thens and let's think about all the different possibilities and options. No, now we've started to maneuver into something and said, wait a second, we've now started to constrain ourselves. We're limiting ourselves based on very specific concepts. And there's really 3 parts to the operative stage thinking. The first is that we're gathering information about the potential resource-doctrine divide. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, what the resource-doctrine divide looks like and what it does for us. All right. The second thing that we're going to do in operative level thinking is we are going to organize very clear objectives, and then we're going to associate with those objectives specific times, specific resources, specific values that help us to understand what it is that we want to do. And we are going to give to each of those objectives a set of key results or KPIs or goals that basically create mission parameters. Here are many things that we're going to have to do in order to get this done. And then from there, we're going to break those down in the tactical into like specific tasks that each person has to do. But this creates concrete expectations for the future. It creates a sense that we now know in the future, here are the things we are going to be working towards. This is what will make the future beautiful in our eyes. This is what will make the future that we want to see possible, feasible. Here are the major things we have to do. It also gives us a sense when we organize around these objectives of where we're going, right? It creates these major stepping stones for us to say, hey, wait a second. I understand that these are my major stepping stones that I have to engage from, or would like to engage in order for me to say, I made it. This fit the bill. It did what I expected it to do. So we're going to have to look at, well, how much energy and resources are we going to have to use over time? And we're going to be able to delineate that feasibly in this way. And lastly, what we're going to see is that there are certain values, morals, and doctrine that are really going to limit or delineate what's considered acceptable action here. The culture of the organization or the culture of the group and the nature of that group and the things that the people within that group are and aren't willing to do will very much focus what's possible and what objectives can be prioritized and which ones can't. Which ones can be given the time of day and which ones you just can't even think about doing for whatever reason. So the organizing of objectives allows us to start to organize for action. It takes all of the different things that we said in the strategic stage and says, wait a second, these are grand ideas, these are wonderful concepts. Now, how do we make that absolutely possible? What do we have to do to really get there? So you're going to start figuring out what it is that you need to change for yourselves. What is it that we have to do? And it helps you figure out what are the positive actions that will help us to move forward if we do not hit all of these. What are the absolute positive actions that we can take for our future selves? And at this point, it's where we're really going to start feeling feedback over time. It's when we move into the tactical, and then if we're continuing on this process, it's not just a one-off, right? But it's something that we're trying to do over time. This is where you're really going to start feeling that feedback, because as you use your time and energy, you're going to realize how that time and energy, how effective that use of time and energy was, and it will allow you to figure out whether or not you are able to continue on the process, or if you need to adapt how you're using the resources, and that'll be a function of what you understand from that feedback loop. I hope that made sense. So what happens is we start moving through and we look at things like the resource doctrine relationship. And there's a fundamental relationship between resources and doctrine, because resources want to get used all the time. My favorite story about resources is when you just get your paycheck and you're walking down the street, and I'm pretty sure I've said this to you guys before, but I'm gonna say it again. You're walking down the street and if you're like me and you see a new phone on the, you walk past the store and you go, oh, that looks like a wonderful new phone. I would love to get it. Oh, wait, I have to pay all these bills. And no, I'm not going to buy that phone right now. No way. And you start to walk away, and not 3 seconds later, you find yourself in the store going, can I please have one of those? And cha-ching. And, the resources love to use. That's why there's a concept, money burns a hole in your pocket. It wants to get used. Time is always being used. You can't stop time. People say, I'm going to save time. And I'm like, no, you're not. You can't save time, people. What you can do is you can choose how you're going to use it. But as a resource, time is always being used. Always. And what we're doing is we're defining how we're going to use that resource. What helps us to figure out how we want to use that resource, what's important to us about using that resource, is doctrine. And doctrine has a restrictive or a limiting nature to it. It says, based on the value system, what's important to us, here's how I expect us to use our time and energy and our money and our other resources that are available to us. So it's doctrine, essentially, and our ability to maintain and uphold doctrine that allows us to move beyond that store and go, yeah, I'm not going to buy that right now. I got to make sure people have food on the table. I got to make sure my bills are paid. And I'm pretty sure that after I do all that, I'm not going to have that money. But if I do, then I'm going to allow myself permission to use this resource in order to buy that phone. Right? But the nature of the resource is, no, use me now. You don't know if you'll have me later. And it's so important that you use me right now, please. Right? The classic version of this is the woman in the shoe store, right? She walks by the shoe store, she sees a pair of shoes and goes, I have to buy those shoes. Well, whether it's shoes or it's a phone, or if it's nuclear weapons, if nobody were to stop the military from using all of its armament to get whatever done it needed to get done, it would literally use everything it has in its arsenal in order to get as much of, to get done what it believes needs to get done. That's how the military would work. But doctrine is what helps them say, wait a second, we don't use nuclear weapons except for very specific situations, and we have to get very specific permissions. And that's not just true for nuclear weapons. That's true for a lot of different kinds of weapons. The nature of the engagement is being defined here in the operative. at the operative level in the operative stage of the process. It's true for your projects. For your projects, you are sitting here and defining for yourselves, well, we have until the end of the school year, but if we want to break this up reasonably, then here's the time frames that we need to think about. And then, well, how much time is each of us willing to put in? What does that time mean? When is that available? Are we willing to get WhatsApps at 2 a.m. about this? Or, hopefully Discord, because you should be doing this on Discord, at 2 a.m. about this or not? So doctrine includes these values, and while resources are pushing to get used, doctrine goes, wait, nope, we're going to hold back here, either because we know that there's something in the future that might make it reasonable or we might need these resources, but also simply because this is not how we use these resources. This is not how we use these resources. And it's an interesting point. When you say we, are you talking about you, your family? Are you talking about you, your society? Because, if you think about the difference between the mafia, right, and the rest of society, is there anything wrong with using a gun in the mafia to resolve a dispute? No. In Western society, within the laws and frameworks that we live within, there are certain morals and values which say you don't sit there and whip out your gun in order to deal with a dispute. It's not an objective that you would set for yourself of like, hey, we're going to knock that person off. On the other hand, governments do this all the time. Political assassinations happen all the time. Military assassinations happen all the time. Right? So on the one hand, we say, wait, Western countries and morals don't do that. I would say, yes, Western society doesn't do that within the framework of its citizenry. But on the other hand, and the mafia does it, and gangs do it. So it very much depends on what the we we're talking about is. That's going to help us understand what doctrine looks like. Now, when we do this, we sort of say, okay, based on what I know about the grand picture, the idea, the thing we want to do, and the overall concept that we're working within, well, how many resources do I have? And how many of those resources can I bring to bear at once? Right? If you've got a group of 1,000 people working, you can have a whole bunch of different objectives, and each of those objectives can have teams maneuvering to try and hit key results for them and goals for those objectives, so that each of those objectives is sort of being met, at the same time. But what happens when you don't have a lot of resources? Right? Okay, it's just me, or it's me and a small group of friends, and we can't set up and start splitting up into a whole bunch of objectives. So we're going to hit objective 1, and then we're going to hit objective 2, and then we'll hit objective 3. So there's sort of like a way that the resources are also going to help you define what it is you can do. Right? I hope that makes sense. That if functionally you're saying, okay, if you look at it from the resource perspective, you could say, hey, do I have a lot of resources? Do I not have a lot of resources? Do I have a lot of time or not? For instance, it's Friday afternoon and you're trying to get ready for a Friday night meal and people are coming at 6 and it is right now 3 o'clock and you have got your cooking to do and your cleaning to do and you're this to do and you're that to do, right? You don't have the luxury because of a resource that is just running away from you, time, to go, oh, I'm going to do all the cooking first, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do that. So what do? You put up the soup and the chicken, and then you run and you do some cleaning, and then you quickly go back and you make some rice, and you check on the whatevers, and then you go and do another piece of the cleaning, and then you're running back to doing this, and you're running. So you're not running down this as objective 1, and then objective 2, and then objective. You just can't do it. But you would like to. It would make your life so much easier if you could say, I am focusing right now on cooking. I am focusing right now on the Ukraine and Russia. Biden would love to be able to, say, I'm right now focusing on the Ukraine and Russia. Period. End of story. I don't want to, but he's not. He's got that, and he's got Corona, and he's got internal issues, and he's got, Canada, and he's got Mexico, and he's got all these other things that he's trying to deal with. Now, he has a lot of resources that he can use. So he's got objectives that he's setting, and he's got lots of people working on each of those different objectives. But he also is spending some of his time doing these things. Same thing with Bennett, right? Bennett has got people working on all of these different objectives, but at the same time, he's being forced by circumstances, by the nature of the events that he's dealing with, to take of his own time and energy to focus on certain aspects of this. So he will feel at times like he's moving through objective one, and then he's having a meeting about another objective, and he's having a meeting about another objective. But at the same time, he's going to feel the pull of all the different objectives all at once. Now, there's an opposite side to this, which is what happens when doctrine and resources are sort of playing off each other. Doctrine will tell you if it's okay to have different objectives running at the same time. Doctrine, your value system will help you understand if it's worthwhile for multitasking to take place. And I'm putting multitasking there in like major quotes, because the multitasking I'm talking about is not necessarily you multitasking. It may be the entire organization multitasking. There are times when the organization is going to go time out. We are all hyper focusing right now on this because we believe it's so important. Not because of the resources involved, not because of the time frame involved, but because we believe it's super duper important. Right? And when you're doing that, the way you're going to talk about, the way you're going to engage is very different. Because you might say, you know what, we it's not an issue of limited resources. I could run 12 objectives right now at once, but I don't want to. I want to make sure that objective one is exemplary. When I'm done with that, I'll worry about objective two. But I want all of my forces to engage right now on getting this thing done. It is so important to us. That's a doctrinal statement. It's not a statement of resources. Resources didn't define that. Okay, so we can look at this balance and we literally sit there and play this game back and forth. And there'll be times when we'll do, objective one, objective two, objective three all at the same time. And there will be times where we're going to do, no, I am super focused, and it's because of what I believe to be important. It's because of what I believe to be important. You don't have to think that's important, but we do. So that's how we're going to focus. That's how we're going to do things. Okay? Does anyone have a question up until now? Chloe, question. Asher, do you have a question? Paulina, nice to see you online. Hey, questions? Anyone? Okay. So when we look at resources, what are we going to focus on? There are three major resources, and these are like the major ones, and then there's a whole bunch of other ones. The first resource is time. I will say this until I'm blue in the face. Time is a resource you can never, ever, ever, ever get back. You cannot save time. It is not possible. All these time-saving devices and stuff, they don't save time. What they do is they help you manage how you use your time. Okay? What you can do is you can delineate or make time for certain things. You can say, I'm not going to save time, but I'm going to make sure I make time to get this thing done. You are looking at it from a resource perspective. Or a doctrinal perspective, excuse me. This is so important to me. I'm going to guarantee that I make time for this, whatever this is. All right. The next resource, which is top three resource, is your human relations. Whether it's your network, whether it's your family, your friends, the people who are at your work, people who you've met through different networking systems, even on LinkedIn, that resource is immense. First of all, because when you can pull on that to bring those people into play for certain things, like, hey mom, can you please do the shopping for me? I'm not going to get home until later and it's really important. Or, hey guys, we really need to get these 5 things done and I can't do them all. Can you please take this and you two take this thing and you and I will work on this. Let's get this done. That ability to engage that network and have those people working with you or for you, depending on whether you are leadership or whether you are simply part of the group working communally, that will help you define and delineate in a very, very clear way how important that resource is. And I cannot express enough, because if you can let someone else do something for you, like if you can pay someone to do your cleaning for you, right? You have now made time for you to do other things, right? So that's a human resource that you're using, that you're engaging, and it's not even someone who's necessarily part of your structure, right? It's somebody who you've hired from outside of your structure using financial resource in order to provide yourself with more time to do things that you would like to do or that are important to you. And that's a human resource. You are engaging that human in order to get other things done. And the last resource, which is super duper important and just it's top 3, is your knowledge bank. It's what you can say you know. It's those things where you go, I so know this, it's great, and I can learn this about this, and I'm going to learn this about that. Because if you have knowledge, it provides you the ability to get things done, right? If you know how to do something, if you've learned how to do something, if you have that skill set in your repertoire, or if you have the knowledge about how something works in the world, then you can understand what variables or what leverage you need to apply in order to make the world the way you want it. Now that might be history, because you have to learn from history. It might be actual, key information about certain people or certain places or certain events, whatever it is. That knowledge is super important. Now, here's the great thing about the networking is that sometimes you may not have that knowledge, but if your network has that knowledge, you may be able to get it. Right? So those 3 things working together, time and your human resources and your knowledge, are your top 3 resources. And they're dependent upon you, right? Absolutely dependent upon you. Like, you have to engage with people to create that network. You have to define and delineate time and understand how time works for you. You have to understand your knowledge bank, where it's missing things, and you have to figure out what you can do to improve it over time to make that resource work to your benefit as an organization. And one of my former students put up a post the other day. He's like, hey, we're trying to create some kind of wiki that'll allow us to have a knowledge bank about how to do this thing. And yes, it's exactly what they're doing. They're creating for their organization that resource so that people can simply go on to whatever program they chose to use and type in, hey, I'm looking for information about, I don't know, previous costs of this, previous purchasing costs of this program or whatever, that provides them with that knowledge. They didn't have it in their heads, but the organization is protecting that resource and that knowledge so that if somebody leaves or, chas v'shalom, somebody dies, that knowledge isn't lost. And that's a huge thing, because a lot of companies will have someone who's like a key figure in their system, in their structure, and that person's like the go-to person who knows how to do this thing. And then they die. Suddenly, in a car accident. And nobody knows how to do that thing. Now, I'm not saying that person necessarily needed to mentor someone, but if they'd had it written down in a formal document of this is how we do this thing, it might help maintain that resource. Okay? Now, there are secondary forms of resources. And these secondary resources, some of them are more renewable and some of them are less renewable. Natural resources, raw materials, and other natural resources, some of them are more renewable and some of them are less renewable and some of them are not renewable. If we are wise, then we will make a concerted effort to use renewable resources, to limit our use of resources which are difficult to renew, and we will make sure that we limit to not using or try not to use at all those resources which are not renewable. We hope. Most companies nowadays are trying to make some effort in this regard. How great an effort? Well, that depends on the doctrine of that company, doesn't it? How do they think about the world, and what do they believe about climate change? What do they believe about natural resources and the hierarchy of man over resource? Do they believe that man is supposed to be above the resources and above everything? Or is it that, we're all supposed to be working together? Chloe, you okay? Don't die on me, okay?
I just have a cough/cold.
Okay, no dying on me. I'm serious. Right? Then there's man-made resources, right? Those things that we can actually produce for ourselves. Those resources, some of those are renewable and some of them are not. And some of them are longer term. They'll last for years and years and years. And then there are resources which we use that are man-made that are one-time use. And we choose which ones of those we're going to use, right? And government right now, for instance, the government in Israel right now is trying to delineate through doctrine something about this. Like, are we allowed, like now, when it comes to one-time use silverware and one-time use plates, plastic plates and things, they are trying to make it less likely that people will use those resources. They're man-made resources, but they're still trying to enforce a worldview, a doctrine which says that's not okay. And they're using that in order to maintain a sense of, well, this is negatively impacting other parts of the world. It's negatively impacting other resources in our world, and therefore we need to tighten the belt. Now, I've made this argument before and I'm going to make it again. Financial resources are renewable. Okay? Financial resources are renewable. I know that when someone faces getting fired or when they don't have a job, it feels like financial resources are not renewable. And I know that when you spend money, very often it feels like, but I'm spending this money, I'm never going to have that money again. Yes and no. Because if we hoard our money, right, as I want to have this resource, I want to have it, and I'm not putting it to good use in any way, shape, or form, then it's that power and potential that we talked about at the beginning of the school year, where sure, you've got $1 gazillion, but you're not doing anything with it. Now what, right? But on the other hand, if you're saying, okay, wait a second, I know that if I spend this money, it will also help me make money, right? If you spend money on learning a new skill, right, you are hoping that by spending that money, it will create a renewable income from that skill set. You have learned a skill and that skill will help you make more money. Same thing when you hire someone and you're paying them to do something. You are hoping that one of two things is happening. Either A, it's relieving you of the burden from doing that thing so that you can use your time differently, or you are hiring that person so that they can improve the output of your organization and give you the ability to make more money if it's a company, right? And if you're talking about the military, it's the same thing. When the military spends money on bullets for training, they're doing it with the very real sense of, hey, we need to spend this money with the concept of, but if we spend this, it's not like, oh, we're going to spend it and you're not going to give us more money. We're going to spend this to train these people so that when we get into a firefight, they're going to be really skilled at what they do. And that will be the payment we get for having spent that money. That will be the income that comes from having spent that money. And in the meantime, my expectation as a military organization is when we budget again next year, you're still going to budget for me. You're still going to include, these major things in the budget because they're important. Right? So there is this sense that over time, finances are renewable. Money as a resource is a renewable thing. It's all a question of what we're willing to do. Right? So there's resources in potentia and there's actual resources. The actual resources, the one you actually have. And then there's those resources that are in potentia. Those resources where you go, I might be able to have that resource. I might get that resource. I'm not sure. I hope to get that resource, right? An actual resource, you already have it, you can use it. In potentia is like when you use your credit card. And I'm not talking about an Israeli credit card, which, takes the money off anyway. I'm talking about a proper credit card where you go cha-ching, and at the end of the month, they send you a bill saying, hi, you've borrowed this much money, and you did it with the idea that you were going to make that much money and be able to cover this bill. Right? You are using a resource that you don't yet have. Now, people do this all the time. People buy houses with you doing this. They take out mortgages. Companies do this all the time. Right? But they are doing it with the sense that at some point, this is going to move from a resource in potentia into a resource in actuality. Right? People who live, or companies that live on the basis of resources in potentia, eventually find themselves in a very, very tight situation where they are at a make it or break it stage. And then they have to declare bankruptcy as a company. And the company breaks apart. Because they thought they were going to be getting, so they use resources they didn't actually have, or that they had, but were assuming would be renewed in Potentia, and then they found out that's not going to be renewed for you. So it's very important to sort of delineate and define the nature of the resource, and really understand what its impact will be on future events as you're setting objectives. It's like if you say you want to make a specific kind of meal and you go, I'm going to get this kind of meat and I'm going to get that kind of veggies, I'm going to get this kind of thing and that kind of thing as your major goals. Like, these are the things we're going to make, right? Here's the kind of things we're going to make. And you say this is what you're going to do, and you've set these objectives, these goals for objective cook meal, but you don't have any of those things yet. What happens when you go to the store and the butcher goes, I'm sorry, we don't have that cut today? Well, if you're lucky, you did that on a Monday or a Tuesday, and you have time still to go and get that meat from somewhere else. But if you've waited until Friday morning, now you're going to have to adjust the goals that you set for that objective, because you were working on the premise of resources in Potentia. All right, onward and upward. So once again, the idea of plan comes up because a lot of people think of doctrine as part of a plan, or a plan in and of itself. Doctrine is a belief system. Doctrine is about values. It's about morals. Strategy creates the framework within which the planners need to function. At the operative, it's where we really feel ourselves planning. Like, it's where doctrine starts to come to play, and we go, that's okay, that's not okay, that's important, that's not important. This is what we know we can do. This is what we don't believe we should do. Right? And this is an appropriate action to take. This is not an appropriate action to take given the situations that we expect to be in, or that we find ourselves in. So it teaches us what to think and how to act. It teaches us what to think. Like, what does it mean to think about this topic? And it determines what is allowed for what is allowed to do, what we're allowed to do. So it acts sort of like the intermediary, kind of between that, hey, vision, we're gonna win the war, and here's how you're allowed to do. Here are the things you're allowed to do to actually get that. Here are the maneuvers that we will accept from you in order to get that done. So if we use Doerr's objectives and key results system, what we're saying is that doctrine limits or permits the use of energy towards a specific objective in seeking those key results. It says, for this objective, here are the key results, and here's what's acceptable in order to attain those key results. Here are the goals you can hit given what we believe is good. Right? So one of the major things that will delineate doctrine is strategic culture. One of the major things that will help us really set up and understand what our doctrine is and what we want to indoctrinate new people who are coming into our organization to believe will be the strategic culture of the organization. So companies will talk about things like transparency or ownership. The military will talk about things like following orders, because these are inherent parts of the structure, and respecting the hierarchy. right? While in a company, they might go, you don't have to respect the hierarchy. You can jump through the hierarchy. If you have a good idea, take it to the right person, not to the next person up on the hierarchy, but to the right person. While the military might go, no, you have to work through the chain of command. That's how we work, right? Those are totally different strategic cultures. And doctrine, it helps to teach people that. And it provides context for the events and the behaviors that we expect our people to follow through with. Here's how we should understand this event. Oh, that person had a great idea and took it to the COO, the very top of the pyramid, and talked to the head of operations. This person took it to the head of operations for the Marines. This person's a private, that person's a private in the hierarchy of the organization. A newbie techie and a newbie just finished basic training, private. One of them going to the COO, that event would be maybe translated as, what a brilliant maneuver, because that person clearly had a good understanding of what needed to get done and saw something that nobody else saw. And it was just, this person broke the chain of command and didn't do this right. Same event in terms of what actually happened, but the way it's given context, the way we understand it, is wrong. The person in the military might still have a positive outcome, like, oh my gosh, he's right. But at the end of the day, he will probably still be brought up on some form of disciplinary action for having done wrong. So doctrine and strategic culture, as part of that, help to formulate a framework of beliefs, attitudes, and habits. You know, when they talk about creating good habits, they're basically talking about indoctrinating yourself to create systems in your life that will follow a pattern, right? And those patterns will give you context for, okay, you woke up and your alarm went off in the morning, right? The context you're going to give to that will be based on your doctrine. It'll be based on how you've set up a system in relation to when that happens, what do you do? Are you the person who hits snooze and rolls over for another 10 minutes? Or are you the person who goes, my alarm just went off, here's how my system automatically responds to that event. Get up, get moving, start my morning workout, start my morning prayers, whatever it is you do. Now, part of what's going to help define that, obviously, is rational choice. Right? Well, what are my options? What are the real options that I've got here? And can I get away with rolling over on my with a snooze? Or do I have to get up and get moving because I have kids who need to get out the door? Because, right, there are certain choices that are going to become more or less feasible given what's available to you. But those choices still will be translated, will be understood through the context of your belief system. What you believe is important. And as part of the strategic process, what will happen is rational choice will only play a part in the doctrine. Because sometimes it's going to be based on what you believe and what you feel and what you think. Like, it's not going to be based on here are the different choices I have in front of me, and I'm going to be absolutely objective about this, and I'm going to choose A, B, or C. It doesn't work that way, people. Come on, you know that. Even in companies, it doesn't work that way. Because there's a feeling that comes with, like, this feels right. This doesn't feel right. This is a good choice. This is a bad choice. So we look at all of these and we understand that strategic culture is inherent to doctrine. It's a big part of how doctrine works. It's how you create a feeling of what does it mean to be us in my world? Our family, our company, our group, our class, our project, our military, our political institutions, our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, our Ministry of Health, right? And they're dealing with this right now very much in the sense, I mean, think about Corona for a second. Think about how doctrine is playing a role, how beliefs and attitudes and habits and rational choice and ideology are all playing a role in decision making about whether or not we go into lockdown, whether or not we have the airport open, whether or not we let people in, whether or not we don't let people in, whether or not people have to be in quarantine, whether or not people have to get PCR tests or antigen tests. Some of this is based on rational choice, based on very scientific data that says here's the information. But some of this is based in fear. Some of this is based in beliefs. Some of this is based in attitudes. And it's also based in the habits of different people and how they see this society as a whole engaging in certain habits. And whether that strategic culture, that culture of, for the company, for the country, allows or doesn't allow a specific set of actions. Now, when we're talking about the military, it is obviously underneath the auspices of some political hierarchy. But what happens when we're talking about democracy, where it's supposed to be the will of the people? Now, I'm not talking about, direct democracy where we all go aye or a or nay. I'm talking about even in representative democracy, right? Where, hey, the people who we voted for are still supposed to represent the ideas that we voted them into office for, right? So you would hope that they would be under the umbrella, the guidance of, when they set objectives, under the guidance of those ideas that we chose politically in our elections, right? So what happens when we're talking about the military, for instance, is the military will look at it only after or once they understand the political objective. Now we really moved into what does it mean to set an objective? Well, if we look at the political objective for any engagement, any military engagement, we are talking about whether or not the political entity, the other, survives. Do I want to kill them off entirely or not? At the beginning, thinking about Corona for a second. At the very beginning, how did they talk about Corona? We're going to kill it off. We have to kill it. We have to get rid of it entirely. Those are high-end objectives. That's a super high-end objective if you think about it. To eliminate something entirely, to get rid of it, right? If we're looking at this thing over here, right? Let's get a little thingy here. I can use a laser pointer, right? If you look over here, right, at the high-end objectives, when we're talking about an extermination of something, we're talking about way over here, right? This is what we're talking about. We're talking about genocide. We're trying to kill Corona. Get rid of it, right? But we can also talk about that when we talk about other political institutions, other governments, or non-governmental institutions and non-governmental groups. Do we want to eliminate them? Do we want to absorb them, conquer them? Do we want to change the form of government? Who gets to rule and why? There's a huge issue taking place right now in India, if I'm not mistaken, that's debating the whole caste system. And there are groups in America who are actually looking to change that through their influence through the universities. There are universities who are now starting to look at the caste system as fundamentally problematic and are saying, wait a second, we want to change how that happens there. Not, it's not, they're in America, right? But they want to change what's going on over there in India. And they're trying to do that. They believe that there's a high-end objective. Or we might want to change the regime. All of these are about changing or getting rid of the idea, the other. Whether it's the other idea, the other thing, whatever it is, you're trying to destroy whatever it is in some way, shape, or form. Or change it so significantly that if someone were to come from the past and look at it in the present or in the future, they would go, but that's not that. That's not that thing. But then there's the other side. The other side is I'm okay with the thing surviving. I recognize that it needs to survive. There's nothing I can do about that. But what does that exactly mean, and what do I want to get out of it, right? So here we might take a slice of the territory. In companies, this might be taking some of the clientele. or we're trying to have a bigger market share. I don't want to get rid of the other company. I don't want the other company to disappear. I like having a company that I'm competing with. It helps me out. It keeps the friction alive that we need, right? It keeps the game going. Remember Cynic and his different kinds of games, right? But I would love to get more market share. I would love to take a bigger slice of that pie. I would love to own that piece of territory. Is the Ukraine trying to do this? Is Russia trying to do this? Or are they going to try and do this? I don't know. We'll find out. Right? And then from there you can move into even less significant or more limited political objectives. Reduce their ability to act. Just reduce their ability to engage. Right? One of the things that we do on a regular basis with Hezbollah is we don't try and take a slice of their territory. We owned a slice of their territory for a very long time. We give it back, right? But on a regular basis, our Air Force goes, and we are literally trying to reduce the enemy's capacity to engage. But we're doing that under the auspices of a political desire. The political will is not to take a slice of the territory. It's not to change the regime. It's not to change the form of government or conquer or eliminate them. That's not how that engagement is taking place. That's not how the game is being played right now. The political game, the interaction between ideas, different ideational structures, is I just want to reduce your ability to get things done, to do what you want to do. I'm okay with me being able, I don't want you to be able to do what you want to do. I want to do what I want to do. Right? Or we might say that sometimes we're trying to change policy. We're trying to get you to act a little bit differently. I'm trying to get you to change the way you choose to manifest your will. I'm not going to limit your capabilities. I'm not going to try and reduce your capabilities. I'm not going to try and take away the things you can do. The difference here is, for instance, I'm going to go parent on you for a minute. It's the difference between taking away the toy and trying to get the child to learn or understand how you want them to use the toy, or what's an okay way to use that toy or engage in that game, right? One is, I'm going to take this away from you. I'm reducing your ability to play. The other one is, I'm going to let you play, but I'd really like it if you change the way you're playing. And then the last one is to intimidate them. I'm just trying to scare you. I'm trying to make you worried. I'm trying to get you thinking. You know how parents do this? They come into the room and smile. And you go, what? And they go, oh, nothing. No, what? What did I do? What's wrong? Right? There's lots of ways that politicians, the political engagement takes place in this case, where it might be through diplomacy, it might be through military action, but it tends to be very different than when you're trying to get rid of something, or when you're trying to, change the policy, or when you're trying to take a slice of territory or get into the high-end political objectives. Right? So what happens is there's this meshing, this melding, as it were, between these strategic objectives, these strategic thoughts. I want this government to continue. I want this idea to live on. I want this thing to not survive. Yes, survive. I want this to happen. I don't want this to happen. This is the future I want to see, as it were. And then the military objectives, those objectives in the operative, which go, okay, given what I've been told, what am I allowed to do? What are the resources that I could use, and what's the doctrine that's defining that? There's a huge difference for doctrine, but in genocide and extermination or conquest and absorption than there is in reduce enemy military capacity. Doctrine will change how you can act in those cases. It will change what is and isn't acceptable. Somebody ask a question. I know someone has a question. Not that good. I'm going to make someone ask a question. Paulina, do you have a question? Paulina, do you have a question?
No questions, Your Honor.
No questions, Your Honor. I am not a judge. But thank you very much. That's very sweet. Jaegers is back. Okay, cool. Asher, do you have a question? Asher? I can't.
No, sir.
No, sir. Come on, you guys.
Hey, yeah, sure.
You have a question? Oh, come on, you guys suck. Fine, no questions. All right, let's take a look at this in depth. If we look, okay, we're gonna go over to here, and we're gonna go like that, and we're gonna go like, come on, get away from the thing, move over to here. Oh, I know why. Hold on, gotta stop doing that. Go away. All right, so, yes. All right, this is, just to put it into perspective for you, this thing here is the Ministry of Defense, not ours, the English Military of Defense, counterterrorism model from 2003. It was part of the chapter on, it was a new chapter to the Strategic Defense Review from 2003. What I want you to see here, and what's really important for me, why is this doing this? I want you to stop. Turn off laser pointer. Good. And I would like to be on that one. Okay. What I want you to see here is that when we're going through this, look at the very beginning of the thing. It says knowledge superiority. Knowledge superiority is very much about incoming intelligence, right? And then you'll see that there are 3 major strategic objectives that have been set. One is detect, one is understand, and one is influence. Those are the political objectives that have been set in relation to terrorism. Political objectives. We want knowledge superiority. That's our ideal type. We want to make sure we know more than they do, as much as humanly possible. And then we want to take this and we want to break it down into, well, we want to know that we know as much as we possibly can about detecting. We want to make sure we know how to detect what they're doing. We want to understand as much as we possibly can about the different organizations, about their intentions, about et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we want to know how to influence them. And then when you move into the operative, they go, okay, well, let's set some clear objectives here. Clear objectives. And these objectives are, each of them, within the realm of limited, or most of them. They're not all though, right? Prevent, limited objective. Deter, limited objective. Coerce, limited objective. Disrupt, limited objective. And then they get to the last one, which is high end, destroy. Do you see it? Do you see how this is a move from the strategic concept into the operative objectives, and how they're being delineated by a very clear understanding of what we believe to be important. Okay? And as we move through this, what we'll find is that the conditions that favor like the emergence of terrorism, that's something you can prevent. That's something you go, okay, I'm going to prevent that thing. And I'm going to move through this and I'm going to go, okay, I'm going to conditions that favor the emergence of terrorism and the development of terrorism and its state sponsorship. I'm going to try and prevent those 2 things. How am I going to do that? What am I going to do? Well, I'm going to persuade, I'm going to build capacities, I'm going to show them what I can do, and I'm going to stabilize organizations or governments that might be threatened by terrorism. That's how I'm going to prevent terrorism. Because I believe that that is an important way to help maintain those countries that might face the threat of the development of terrorism and its sponsorship by states. Well, okay, how am I going to deter terrorism? What am I allowed to do? Well, I'm going to deter terrorist attacks, and I'm going to try and deter state sponsorship of terrorism. I'm setting 2 very specific goals for this objective of deterrence. How am I going to do that? What are permissible ways to do that? Through communication, through demonstration, through actual acts that will demonstrate my will in this matter, and by responding to potential acts of terror. I'm going to coerce. Who am I going to coerce, or what am I going to coerce? I'm going to coerce the terrorists. I'm going to coerce state sponsors of terrorism. Why? Because by coercing them, what am I going to do? I'm going to demand certain kinds of actions from them. I'm going to threaten them. I might even use force in order to stop them if I have to. In order to coerce them to a specific, put them in jail. Arrest them. Disrupt, same thing. right? If we start with disrupt, we go, here, let's go up to the top. If we're talking about disrupt, right, you get disrupt and you go, okay, well, disrupt, well, how do I disrupt them? I'm going to disrupt their activities and I'm going to disrupt their sources of support for terrorism. Well, how am I going to do that? I'm going to isolate these different things. I'm going to deny them access to certain resources and I'm going to dislocate them. I'm going to move them from where they are. I'm going to remove them from the picture as much as I possibly can. And last but not least, I'm going to destroy them. These are all military objectives, right? But they fall under the premise of the political objective that was set in the strategic. Do you guys see this? Does this make sense? Does anyone have any questions about what I just showed you? Oh, come on, no questions. You guys suck. You gotta have some questions. How is it that you have no questions? Fine. Onward and upward. And what happens is that you take this and please notice, because it's very important, they have here a feedback loop. They have here a feedback loop. Look, each of these leads to a feedback loop. Each of these leads to a very specific feedback of, look, this is going to give us further knowledge superiority, and we're going to learn from these things. And in learning from these things, we will better be able to detect, to understand, and to influence. Right? Influence predominantly will be prevention and deterrence. Understanding will be predominantly about coercion. Detection will be about disruption and destroy. Predominantly, that's where the political focus is. It's giving us the political focus. And then it's translating it into the military focus. We could do the same thing with a company, right? Knowledge superiority for Apple, right? And then you give, okay, what are the three main things that they want to do? They want to innovate. They want to maintain market share or increase market share, and they want to eliminate competition or minimize competition, right? And they're going to go, okay, well, how do I do those things? I'm going to innovate. Well, I'm going to do a lot of R&D. I'm going to look at new and upcoming, like I'm going to create new and upcoming markets, create a new market. That's a not a strategic objective necessarily. That already becomes an operative objective in order for innovation to take place. Okay. Now, this is one of many. There are lots and lots of ones that look like this. And as we move through, what we find is that you can almost see Clausewitz's triangle coming into play in a very real way. Because Clausewitz comes and says there are three major influences on this kind of decision making. One is the emotion, one is the reason, and one is the will. Where reason is the government coming and saying, hey, we need to get this thing done. This is an important thing. Here's how we are prioritizing strategically. And the people go, okay, we're down with that. That makes sense that you're going to want to do that or not. And then the military has to go, well, we can do that. We're willing to do that. It's something that we have the ability to do. We're willing to take that chance that this may or may not succeed. But this same thing looks, you can find it in a company. A company will have the COO and the people, at the top looking for reasons why things need to get done. Here are things that we feel need to get done. They're very, very important. We have to get these things done. They're super important to us. And then it will be a question of, well, does that feel like something we should be putting our time and energy to? Really? And then the question is, are the people who have to really do this thing, are they willing to do it? And if you can't get them on board to do it, you have a problem. Do you see it? Do you see how this is part and parcel to the whole setting up of objectives? If you want to do something, right, and you want your friends to do something, and you're using reason, but they're going, it doesn't feel right. How likely are they to have the will to act? Not really. Right? So will to act is is dependent first and foremost on the relationship between will and reason, where it's got the will to act versus strategic ideal. But then you've got the will to act versus the desire to act, the emotional feeling of like, hey, it's worth my while to do this thing, right? I'm willing to take, if you're talking about the military, I'm willing to allow violence to take place in my name. And last but not least, you've got this interaction here between reason and emotion where you go, well, is there a desire for action and is there a justification for that kind of action, for that thing we are thinking about doing? And you can see people like racking their brains over this a lot when they're trying to figure out what they should be doing. Is it worthwhile? Is it not worthwhile? Is it a good thing to do? Is it not a good thing to do? Can we do it? Is it worthwhile? Is it a chance I'm willing to take? Is it a risk I'm willing to take or not? So the operative analysis comes down to something very, very interesting. It says, hey, well, if we have a resource-driven concept, if we're going to say we're going to do things based on resource-driven concept, then the resources, the platform, the time frame, the money, the human resources, what we know, minus whatever doctrine says we're not allowed to use, and that will create an effect. That will do the thing I want to do in the world. And there are a lot of people who do this. There are governments that do this all the time. There are companies that do this all the time where they go, what are we able to do based on our resources? Okay, I have nuclear weapons. Am I allowed to use them? I have this kind of bomb. Am I allowed to use it? I have this kind of gun. Am I allowed to use it or not? And once I know if I'm allowed to use it or not, now I know what effects I can create on the world. That's what I can do. And that's what I'm going to do. Can't do more, can't do less. Here are the skills I have. Am I allowed to use these skills or not? Yes, no. Here is the effect that will come if I given that circumstance, and I will set my objectives that way. And I expect the following consequences to come as a result of that decision. The other side of that is to say, well, what do we think is important? What are the values, right? And then what resources can I give to those values in order to get the effect that I want? Right? It's doctrine driven. It says, wait a second, I'm going to let doctrine drive me forward. The most natural way for people to do it is resource driven. The most natural way for people to do it is resource driven. I have this. I know what I'm allowed to do with it. Therefore, I can do that. The opposite of that, it almost feels backwards, is to go, well, what are we allowed to do? What is expected of us? Now, what resources can I give to make that happen? Let's do that. But there's a third way to do this. And this third way, I think, is very, very important. And that's effect-driven objectives. Effect-driven objective says, wait a second, time out. Forget resources and doctrine for a second, just for a moment. What kind of effect do I want to have on the world? What is it that I want to see happen? Like, okay, I know the political objective. I understand whether it's a high-end objective or a limited objective. I understand the nature of it. I understand the function, and I can tell you that we have to set objectives. Now, what are those objectives going to look like? What do I want them to look like? What kind of outcome do I want based on these objectives? What's important to me to have happen? And then based on that, you go, well, what resources do I have to get my hands on? And what values will allow me, and what within my value system will allow me to use those resources? Is there something within my value system which will allow me to use those resources? And then you can set your objectives, because now you said, these are the things I feel have to happen for success to take place. Here are the things that I believe must occur for success to take place. And based on that, based on my ideals and my idea and the outcome that I want to have and what I believe the stepping stones are that are the major stepping stones that are necessary, can I get my hands on the necessary resources? Is there enough time, and do I have the ability based on what I believe is right to do those things? It's a very different way of looking at the world, if you think about it. It's not based on what do I have now and can I do this or not. It's not based on, well, what am I allowed to do? And then let's see if we have the resources to do it. It's what is it that I want to see? What do I believe has to happen? And then looking at the other things and going, okay, based on that, how do I get my hands on the resources necessary that I'm allowed to use? And that's effect-driven objectives. That's an operative analysis which is based on effect-driven concepts. Did you see the difference between these three? Questions, anyone? So far? Sophie, onward and upward. So while we're doing this, when we talk about whether we're talking about resource-driven or we're talking about doctrine-driven or we're talking about effect-driven objectives, the operative analysis still needs to look at what are the gravitational points. What are the major strategic weights that we have to leverage in order for success? What is super duper important? What will be translated by the other person as oh my gosh, they hit this thing and we can no longer fight our battle. We can't win because they've already won the war, right? Or, right, it's like if you knock off the air force of the opponent before they even get off the ground and they cannot get their airplanes up, and now you have air superiority. That's a major it's not an absolute gravitational point, but that's a major gravitational point in armed conflict. Right? Do you remember when we were talking about the Ukraine, we were looking at major gravitational points. If you can control these major junctions and these major bridges and these major, waterways, then, and the way you do that is by looking at things like vulnerabilities. You say, okay, well, where are the weaknesses in the system? And that's effect driven. You say, okay, you might say, okay, do I have the resources to hit that vulnerability? Or is it okay for me to hit that vulnerability? But at the end of the day, if you look at it from an effect-driven perspective, you'll go, there's a vulnerability there, and that vulnerability if I hit that vulnerability, will have the following effect. Worthwhile or not? Do I have the resources or not? And then you're going to choose whether that objective becomes a priority or not. And you're going to do that based on a concepts of opportunity and risk. Obviously, you're going to look at it and go, well, is this an opportunity which is a one-off, or is this an opportunity which I'm going to have for a while and I don't have to engage it immediately in order to engage in this dialogue with my opponent? Okay? Now, in addition to gravitational points and searching for vulnerabilities, and vulnerabilities is not just a military thing, right? People use other people's vulnerabilities all the time in their relations, and major gravitational points all the time in their relations, and how they, people believe that there's something significant, and people will engage that either positively or negatively depending on either the effect they want to have, or based on what they believe in terms of doctrine, or based on the resources that they have available, right? People do this all the time to each other. But then there's something called secondary points. These secondary points aren't the major stepping stones. These aren't like, if you can control these, then you've got absolute leverage on outcome and you can dictate or delineate future. But rather, these are the points where you say, you know what? If I engage these, I may be sending a similar message. I might be sending a good message, bad message, whatever it is, but I've not taken away the other person's ability to act. I haven't hit something which is of such significant weight that it now negates something in the other person's, or in the opponent's, or in my partner's ability to engage. right? So when we're looking at objectives, so for instance, for your projects, right, you need to look at what are the major gravitational points? What are the major things that, like, here's a significant strategic weight. These are super important. We really need to establish these as objectives. If we don't hit these, we cannot say we succeeded, period, end of story. But here are some secondary points where if we can hit these, it would be really great. And here are some of the vulnerabilities that we have or that we can engage in an other in order to better improve our situation. So we talk about things like objectives and key results, right? Where objectives, right, are the steps for vision. And then the key results or goals are the metrics for success, right? Those key results. Here's the things I want to see. Here's the effects I want to have, the different effects I want to have based on this objective. And because of that, I can say, okay, well, I need to do A, B, and C in order to say I created that effect and therefore I met this objective. Questions so far? Anything? Anything? Great. Next slide. So what does the operative analysis look like? You're going to take your resources, you're going to mash them with your doctrine, and then you are going to organize those two things around very clear objectives. And you're going to delineate amongst those objectives key results, key performance indicators, goals that you expect to get hit along the way that will delineate success. And you're going to prioritize time versus import. You're going to go, well, what needs to get done first and how important is that thing? And you're going to balance those things. And you're going to do it based on a hierarchy of need. A hierarchy where you go, these are the things we need, and here's the things we need, and here's the value that this thing is going to bring me for me. And that allows you to delineate what your maneuvers should look like. It should allow you to delineate, here's how we're going to maneuver in this upcoming iteration, in this first attempt at making this thing real, whatever it is. Now you might be asking yourself, well, how do we prioritize? How, okay, these are all well and good, Dr. Leitner, but tachlis, like, get down to the nitty gritty. How do I prioritize these objectives? How do I decide what's important? What's going to be the first things? First and foremost, like I said, you have to choose. Are you doing this based on effects driven? Are you going to do it based on doctrine driven? Or are you going to do it based on resource driven objectives? But once you've done that, now you need to start prioritizing within that framework. And you go, okay, well, how? One of the easiest ways I have seen to do it is to use something called the Eisenhower matrix. The Eisenhower matrix uses two different axes. One axis is how urgent is it for us to get this thing done? Is it a thing that, in terms of time, it's a now or never? Or is it, and then the other axis is, well, how important is this thing given what we know its effect should be on future? If something is, it needs to get done now. And I'm going to put this into two different concepts. One is it should get done now because it's super easy and it's quick and it won't take more than 2 minutes. 5 minutes of your life. And it's important. It's important enough, just do it, get it done. Okay. But then there's the other flip side of that. This is a hugely massive thing. It's going to take time and energy. It's important though. And it's urgent because if we don't get it done soon, then we will have missed the window, which will allow us to do other things that are essential for us to move as we move forward. That's the do it now section. Now, if you remember, if we go back to what I'm going to go back so you can see it. If we go back to this, to that, right? What are we talking about here? We're literally talking about this versus this, right? We're talking about setting objectives in this format versus setting objectives one multiple ones at the same time or one after the other. And you will do this based on where things fall in this matrix. So if something is urgent and it has to get done before other things can get done, or if something is super duper important and out of all the objectives you go, this one it's so important, it has to get done. And it's important that we do it sooner rather than later. Then that's where you focus. Now, they write do it now or do, but it's the thing that we have to focus on in the present. Right? And then there's things which are not as urgent, but they are super duper important. And those are things which you decide when you are going to do that. Once I'm done with this, or once I've moved through this enough that I feel like we've set this part of this objective into motion, now we can start working on this other objective. And now I don't mind that I'm splitting my time between A and B and C because I've done it in a way which makes sense. I've focused first on the thing that I know has to get moving, and then this second thing which needs to get moving, I can get that moving now. And I can schedule that third thing that'll get moving soon thereafter. Right? Now, what happens if something's not important, but it's urgent? Like it's not something that you feel like you need to be doing to get this thing done, but it's got an urgency to it, because if it doesn't get done in the right amount of time, then you will still have missed the window. You go, well, okay, that's something which if I can, I will try and delegate to somebody. Now, what happens when it's just you? You can't delegate. Now you have to make a decision. How important is this? Is it important enough to move straight up into the urgent do it now thing? And again, I'm gonna put that time, the concept of time here, as one of the ways to look at it, right? You can say, well, if I'm doing it based on resource, you go, well, how long is this going to take me to do? Well, it's urgent enough, even though it's not so important, I'm going to do it now anyway. It's just going to take a few minutes. It's going to take a half hour, but I'm going to get it done so that it's off my plate and I don't have to worry about it because I don't have anyone to delegate it to. But then you have to say, well, is it urgent enough and important enough, it's not important, but is it important enough to take over from something else that I should be doing now? Or you look at it from terms of doctrine, where you're saying, well, how important is it, right? It's not about time. It's not about how urgent it is. It's about how important it is. It's a value statement. You go, it's not so important. I'm not even going to delegate it. If I get to it, I get to it. If I don't, it's going to get deleted and there's nothing I can do about it. I'm just going to have missed the window. Or you can look at it based on effect. You can say, well, what would the effect be if I do or don't do this thing? You go, if I don't do it, this is what I expect would happen. If I do it, this is what I expect will happen. Do I move it up or not? Do I move it up into that do now thing, or do I just say, you know what? I don't have anyone to delegate this thing to. It's a lost cause. Now, delegation can be hiring somebody. It can be automating. Automating is a great way to delegate stuff. Like, if you can automate something in your life, do it. And there's lots of ways to automate nowadays. Like, lots of ways to automate. I hope that made sense. And then last but not least, there's those things where you go, you know what? Would be a nice to have. This would be it's not so important, but it would be really great if we could also do this thing. And it's not so urgent because if we don't do it, it's not going to massively negatively impact outcome. But if we did do it, it would be phenomenal. Now, a lot of people get lost on those things. A lot of companies get lost on those things and they sink into those, and they should not. But what happens is they start functionally having those be their main objectives, the things they're going to focus on. And those should be the things that they're eliminating from their priorities, period. They shouldn't be part of the discussion. Who has a question? I want 2 questions from the crowd. 2 questions. It can be about anything we've spoken about today. Come on, people, 2 questions. Chloe, come up with a question. Polina, come up with a question. Asher, somebody come up with a question. Let's go. I'm not that good. I mean, I wish I was, but I'm not. Nothing? Wow. Okay. So if that's the case, a very, very quick question that I have for you guys, and then we'll call it a day. This is not something you have to answer right now, but I would love to see this talked about on Discord. What have you done for your group project over the last 2 weeks? What has been done for your project? Now, I've seen, for instance, Jaegers, I've seen the stuff you guys have been working on, but can you give us a, hey, this is what the group has done, and here's what these people have done, and here's what these people have done. Or better yet, can you delegate to someone else and be like, hey, would you please get together a quick, half page of this is what we did for the last 2 weeks? Now, what obstacles have you encountered or do you expect to encounter over the next 2 weeks? For instance, I know Jaegers, your group had a real problem getting the room. I hope I've resolved that for you. We will find out when you try and contact them. But I know about that obstacle, but you should be writing it down. I want to see it written down somewhere as something that you dealt with over the last 2 weeks as an obstacle and something that you hope to have movement on in the future, right? Now, if there are obstacles that you haven't brought to my attention, one of the things I'd like to see written about on Discord is how over the next 2 weeks do you intend to overcome those obstacles, whatever they are. Now, there are some obstacles which you can probably sit there and go, oh, we have some very big ones right now. Among other ones is that we're all in some form of corona, can't get in touch with each other, can't spend as much time with each other things. I'd like you to think about how you might overcome those obstacles. And I would like to know what you intend to do over the next 2 weeks. So, Polina and Jaegers, you guys are the nominal leaders. I noticed that Josh is not with us, so Polina and Jaegers, Albie, you're part of the group for Josh. Yeah.
Yes, can I?
Yes, you may.
So, all of us got corona except me. Jeffrey is in Turkey, he's doing the video. And if they are not fine, now we'll go get the video.
Okay, so I would like to see something written and put up on Discord, please, about this. I'd like the fact that you all had corona and didn't put it up on Discord, boo on you. I should have known it. Okay, so
with that, we are talking to Josh. Josh will put something on Discord.
Okay, so have Josh put something up. I'd like to know what did you guys do over the last 2 weeks? What were the major obstacles that you faced, including the fact that you had to deal with corona, right? What do you expect for the next 2 weeks? And what kind of obstacles do you think they're going to be over that time period? And I'd like to know what your major objectives are for that time period. What are the things you want to do? Hey, these are the things we need to see get hit for us to be able to say we can move forward. Okay?
Okay, I'm going to talk to Josh after the class.
Okay, thank you very much. Over the next week, we're going to be talking about tactics and strategic implementation, but that's it for today. Does anyone have any questions? Y'all suck.
No. I'll write a document and post it to our group in the next 10 minutes.
Okay, not a problem. It shouldn't be something that takes a lot of time. So if you can prioritize it as a do as opposed to a schedule, that would be great. But if you can't, I understand. No questions? Excellent. I understand that as far as I understand, the rest of the semester will be held in this format, unfortunately. So please let people know that it would be nice if they show up and we can have these conversations here. Next week, we're going to be talking about tactics. We're going to get into the tactical. We're going to start talking about fog of war, stuff like that, and feedback loops in the more immediate sense and what it means to maneuver. We are also going to take time to talk about projects and paper more in depth. So that's next week. I look forward to seeing you all there. And I hope you all stay healthy and happy and get good positive results, but negative results, if you know what I mean. Anyway,
Thank you.
see y'all later.